Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Show Up with Camron Gran. I'm your host, Cameron Gran, and before we dive in, just a reminder, I'm not a therapist. I'm just somebody going on his own mental health journey, trying to show you guys little tips and tricks that have helped me along the way. You guys can take them, you can leave them. It's up to you, but all I hope is that you try something, and hopefully it will help you on your own journey. With that, let's begin with our monthly update. It's now October, and we're entering, spooky season. A lot of scary movies out right now. I'm really excited about that. The whole thing that I'm going to focus on with this month is just kind of a little bit of reflections over what I've learned about myself in the past month. And I know you're thinking, Cameron, it's only been a month. How much more could you possibly learn about yourself? You would think you would, at 29, you wouldn't be able to learn new things about yourself or come to new epiphanies. But I'm sad to tell you guys, life is constantly changing. You are constantly going to learn something new about yourself. And some of it will surprise you. And some of it may be better for you than what you used to think. For instance, my life has been kind of convoluted, and I realize that something that I do a lot is I put a lot of emphasis on the relationships that I have in my life. I value them so much because growing up, I didn't really have people that are actually thinking about me in situations at all. I had parents, but most of their decision making, what they were doing, was for other people. And I don't want to say maybe that's my fault because I was a good kid, because I don't think that should be an excuse to ignore somebody. But that was kind of the thing, is I wasn't problematic, and maybe that was why they felt like they didn't have to give me any attention. And oftentimes I felt like they would tell me, "Oh, you're the good kid, so I don't have to focus on you." And those kind of statements as a kid makes me want to act out, and I never did, because unfortunately my brain is it overanalyzes everything. So I'm like, well, if I did all this stuff, I could have my parents, participate more in my life, but then it would make their life worse. And for some reason, the fact that I care about their life more than my own is the hang up I have constantly. It's like, oh, if I did this thing to somebody that hurt me, I would feel really great in that second, and then after that, my brain would be like, "Oh, but look, think about all the pain I put them through," and I don't know. That's something I want to work through, because there's no grand scheme of whose pain is worth more. For some reason, I always put my pain as I some people can't handle this amount of pain, but I think I've done a really good job handling it, and that I'm afraid that they can't handle it, so I'm gonna let them have this one. I'm gonna let them pretend that they won, or I'm not gonna argue. I'm it's very easy to be like, yeah, for sure, you're right. It's almost laughable to me how many times you can tell somebody that they're right and then just nod and be like, "Oh yeah, wow, yeah, I didn't think about that. Wow, oh," that's very fake. But it's funny to me that when somebody is talking about themselves and what they care about, if not everybody can sense when somebody's actual genuine interest has left the game. And I think for me, the problem with that is when you've always put other people first, then nobody knows what your actual level of "I'm interested in what you're saying" is, because you've always put on that face. And I've had friends be like, "Oh, I thought that you didn't care because you were just being so stoic." And I'm like, "No, I care a lot. I am sorry that the way I know to communicate this is also the way I communicate it when I am upset." Probably not the best thing to do, because then it's called mixed signals. And people are like, "Is Cameron mad at me?" Again, if you guys aren't tallying, eventually at some point in every episode, I swear, I start diving into third person. Sorry, it's just something that helps me explain things to you guys. But it is something that I've noticed is oh, not everybody cares about this as much as I do, or not everybody cares about me enough to actually fix the issue. And so it's all a balancing scale. The balancing scale of life is we're all equal. There is no you deserve something more than somebody else. But in our brain, we have a different balancing scale, and it's called our self-worth scale. And so if our self-worth is really low, people get away with a lot. If our self-worth is at a healthy amount, then they get away with what's what they should, on a normal day basis thing. Those kind of little lies and things that you tell people just to not hurt their feelings, that don't really matter in the grand scheme of things. And And an instance of this is the one where a woman's like I can think of is like the very common one where somebody asks you whether or not they look good in something. And I'm pointing this out because as somebody who brain would never lie, like I had to train myself that because of the amount of like videos out there on like YouTube, on in television shows and movies that tell you that if you answer that question honestly, you're a jerk and you're going to be in trouble with that person later on. So because of that amount of stimulant telling me I shouldn't do that, that's why I've always like, oh yes, you look great in that. Doesn't matter what you look like. Doesn't matter why you're asking. I'm just like, I'll just tell you yes. I don't know why you need that like verification from me, but apparently it's important to you, and so I'm gonna lie. But like my brain doesn't like jump to lying very easily. So like I've had times where I've been like I should say nothing, and be like. And unfortunately, when people are vulnerable and they ask you those things, if you choose to say nothing, it's when you don't have an exit. It's like, oh, I must look really bad because they didn't say anything. And I'm like, oh, I didn't say anything because I didn't want to like lie to you. But my omission felt like me saying something that wasn't lying to you. So basically, it's just one of those things that's fascinating to me with how my brain works. Is it's like I should say nothing because I can't be honest, and then the amount of times people have read correctly what my silence means, a little scary. But that's something else I've noticed about myself. It's just like how my brain works sometimes. It like. There are things that people have yelled at me about that I don't agree with that were actually my fault because something that I've heard a lot is that we are all the product of what we grew up with. And there's going to be a time in life where you are exposed to things that you've never been exposed to before. And so your brain is not going to know how to react in what is considered the correct way. It will react how it will naturally react. And then people who've been around that environment are going to tell you whether or not that was a good thing or not. For instance, my brain, if somebody's really picking on you about something that's so easily fixable, to me the solution is, well, let's get rid of it because they're complaining about it so much. Well, and to bring it back to what the example is, my aunt one time, I arrived at her house and like cannot tell you how many times she kept talking to my father about the state of my beard. Like my beard's not great right now. I probably could like trim it up and make it better right now, but she kept talking about it, and then like to the point that I thought it was like a huge issue for her, that I was like, you know what, I came here and I wanted to make my aunt happy, so I'm like, well, she really has a problem with my facial hair. You know what I'll do? I have shaving cream in my bag. I have a razor. I'll shave in her sink. So I shaved, and then I started getting yelled at for shaving in her sink. And I'm like, why am I getting yelled at? I was trying to get rid of the thing that was bothering you so much. And then she was like, you never shave and let the like beard stuff go down the drain in a well house. Basically, her house is like not actually part of like the normal like well system. She has her own like well that like her and a couple of people where she lives pay for their like community. And so you can never put like follicles and thing down the well, you like down the water pipes, you have to put those other places. I didn't know that. And so she started yelling at me, and then she started reacting in a way and then saying, well, you should know you can't do this kind of stuff. And I'm like, and I really thought it was my problem. And it is my problem in a sense, but like in a sense that I didn't know that was an issue. That's why I'm saying I don't think it was my fault, because I wasn't aware of the thing. And I was doing something with the intention of making my aunt happy. But her reaction told me I was in the wrong. And so in the future, if I ever am like have the instinct to be at somebody's house and they're complaining about my facial hair, I should probably ask the owner, hey, it seems to really be bothering you. I don't know if calling it out in the moment is a good thing or not, because that's confrontation and it might upset some people. So if I know them well, I'll probably ask this question. If I don't know them, we just met, probably not going to ask this question. I'll just deal with whatever they think of me. But like, I'll ask them, hey, do you want me to put like shave my beard? I'm here. I have the equipment to do it. So if you give me like 10 maybe or minutes or less, I can get rid of this thing and we can just not make it part of our ordeal anymore. I probably should ask that question. That probably would have been better. But again, I don't know what it is. I like to torture myself. I like the imagination version of being like, look at this surprise. I did this thing for you. I'm sure you're going to be so happy. Amount of times that's spun around and hit me in the batuki is crazy. But that's an extreme example, and I didn't know this. And then another example is I once got yelled at my sister for driving on her grass, because apparently she was taught at some point that you shouldn't drive on people's grass. It upsets them because it leaves tire marks, even though at her place I've seen them drive through the grass. So again, seeing somebody do something and then being like, oh, they don't care. But I was in a situation where the only way I could get out of a driveway was to drive through the grass. And so I did that to like not make it, had to put more obligation on them. So like I could do something nice for them so they didn't have to come out and like move their cars and stuff like that. And then my sister started yelling at me and then like acting like I had just insulted her in the biggest way possible at anybody's house you go to. You never drive on their grass. And I've never been told that before. I've always lived in the, like, you know, the city, and there's not a lot of grass you can drive on, and I didn't really have a car before. And so, and then the example she used was the same aunt that I had the beard thing with. She's like, you would never drive on that aunt's grass. She would be so upset, to be so disrespectful. And then I'm sitting there being like, what are you talking about? The amount of times that she has told me to drive on her grass to get to places because they're doing construction, or like they have a party going on, and so they shaved the field so that there was enough parking space for everybody to like be at the party. And so we had to drive on the grass. And I was like, what in the world is she talking about? Why would I know you would be upset at this? And it's kind of like when people realize that you've now come upon something you've never heard before, they try gaslighting you as though their issue is your problem. And it's not. It, like, I get if I knew that thing and I'm like, you're right, I did something with the intention of hurting you, and that's my bad. I'm going to apologize for that. But really, every time I get in trouble for stuff, it's because my brain's like, oh, I really don't want to bother this person. I want to make sure they don't have to like put extra effort, or they don't have to get like, I don't want them to like be a burden. And so like my ideas are always like, how do I help them and do these things? And then I get like instantly like punished for it sometimes. That's not a correct thought, but that's how it feels. It's important for me to make that distinction because some people don't catch those things in the moment, and so that's why I'm pointing it out, because there are things that we feel and think that aren't actually the truth of what we should feel, and it's because a lot of times, especially when we just get into an argument or we're in like a heated discussion, I'll call it, we go with our emotions, and our emotions are often wrong, and something that I have trained myself since I was a little kid to do, and I don't think a kid should have to do this, is I have learned how to disassociate myself from my emotions when I'm in the middle of a confrontation, so I can hear what the person is saying rather than reacting to the amount of insults that they're shouting at me, because apparently insults is how you get your point across rather than just sharing to somebody how they upset you. Again, this isn't everybody's family. This is just my own little window into my family this month, I guess. But like, that's just kind of the thing that I wanted to share, is it's like, oh, you guys get upset at this. I'll remember this for the future. I know other things. Like I said, there are tons of examples with the, like, you never answer you never answer honestly when anyone says, do I look good in this? Sometimes you're like, oh yeah, you do. And you put emphasis if it's the truth. But sometimes you're like, oh yeah, you do. Mm-hmm. Again, but those are so obvious to me. Just hearing my voice, it makes me cringe. Because something that I told my friend that's true about me is if I don't know you, I probably could lie to you and be okay with it. But if I know you, like I care about you, like you're somebody that I love or value your friendship so much, it is impossible for me to lie to you. I have tried to lie to a friend, and then literally within 10 seconds, I'll be like, you know what? Sorry, man. I didn't want to upset you, and I didn't want to start a thing, but I can't lie. I'll just tell you the truth. And if you're upset, I get it. And I get that you're upset even more if I lied to you. And the fact that I'm confessing in less than 10 seconds means it's just, that's how fast my, like, I can't do it triggers. It's just like, guys, I can't lie to you because I care about you so much that, like, I don't know why that's a thing in me. I'm like, you don't lie to the people that you care about. I don't know why I have that in me, because that's definitely not the true with most things in my life. Like I didn't learn that from my parents or anybody in my family, because I was often lied to and often told things to placate me so they didn't have to deal with me. And I don't know. Part of me wishes that I don't know why we're so uncomfortable as a society to own our stuff. Because that's something that I'm trying to work on, is like, okay, I've messed up and I'm recognizing that, and I am sorry because I didn't do this stuff with the intention of hurting somebody, but I did hurt them. And so I'm going to apologize and make sure they know that their hurt I care about. And I use that as an example because I was trying to get that conversation with my sister and her grass to the point in the conversation where we could just talk about how she felt from what I said, but she could not get past the grass part of it. And I'm like, you're not upset about the grass. You're upset about the way it made you feel that I did that, but you're refusing to let me like acknowledge those things to you without, like, she felt disrespected. And I understand. I understood that, and my thing was like, okay, I didn't mean to like disrespect you. That's not what I did. I was trying to, I guess, spare you effort and make your life harder. That's what was in my head, because I'm like, well, then she'd have to go in and move all our cars so I get out. But that apparently, I don't know. Apparently, me doing it was what the issue was. But it's just one of the things where I'm like, oh, well, if we could just get past this one thing and get to actually what's upsetting you, this conversation would actually lead to a bigger, like, healing moment between us, rather than us just being upset at each other. Because, and I've always done that, is like, okay, so this person's yelling at me, let me not hear what the thing is specifically and try to find what the root is. Because once you find the root of a conversation and why it's happening, it's easier to like work in your brain and be like, okay, so they're upset and they feel disrespected, and I did this thing. Okay, how can I prevent this from happening in the future? Obviously, with a very basic answer is, this person said don't do this, they're upset, don't do that again. This person showed you, don't do it. And then the only thing in my head that I could do is like, oh, apparently if I see somebody else drive through the grass, that doesn't give me the right to drive through the grass. Okay, even if it's their house and they're like, we're gonna drive, it's not a BMW, but it's sorry, that's a full on car, but it's like those racing bikes. It's just, if I did that, it's just like one of those things where you're like, oh, okay, so even if I see somebody and they're doing it, don't do it because you see them do it. Make sure, like my aunt, ask her first, because my uncle definitely has a beard, and it's definitely a shaped beard. It's not like he just grows it casually, because it's very much a goatee and it's like trimmed and stuff. So he clearly shaves himself. If I had done the step of being like, hey, how do I do this thing? It's very weird, because there's oftentimes in my life when I'm speaking to my family where I feel like something happened and I left the chat, but like their perception of the conversation is still going on. And I'm like, what are they talking? Like, what am I doing currently that's leading them to believe that I'm saying things in a way that they're taking it? That happens a lot with people sometimes. And I'm like, hey, and I'm now at the point where I'm like, hey, I'm going to take a break. Let's take 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And like, I'm going to go over here. You go over here. Because right now I feel like we're talking, but you and I are not talking. You're talking to whoever Cameron is in your brain. Because the real Cameron is trying to have a conversation with you. And no matter what I say, I mean whatever you think I mean. And I don't. And again, it has to do with I'm not saying I don't mean it the way they're taking it, but I know, because of the way that I disassociate sometimes, that the way I train myself to be like, this is the emotion for this, this is the emotion for this. And then if somebody is like, well, what's the emotion if this random random road happens? Then I'm like, I don't know how to feel anymore, because we've left the road of things we've done before. And so now I'm just like robotic. And then people take that to mean like, oh, he doesn't care. And I'm like, no, I care, but I just don't know how to like express how I care. because I've never traveled down this windy road before, and I don't want to say something to make the conversation worse. It's like if you're walking in the forest and all of a sudden you're surrounded by bear traps. You're like, okay, well, clearly this part of the trees and this part of like the woods is not meant for me because I like going on like a hiking trail. I like knowing it's safe, but apparently I stumbled upon bear traps and they're trying to get my legs. So I just need to back up, find a way out, and never come here again. An example of like a real life example of this is I was once on a field trip. Nobody told my parents this, but it was like we went on a field trip in the desert because that's where I'm from in Washington. And then I was the last kid because I am overweight, so I was slower. And I was the last kid on a field trip, and I was out there, and then the teacher was like, "Yeah, guys, it's time to go," because we were on like I think because like there are reserves for animals in Washington, and so I think we were on one of those, and then the teacher was like, "Yeah, everybody, come on, let's go," and so all the other kids had left, and so the road had emptied, and I was just there, maybe a distractor, maybe I had taken a rest because it was a far way back to go back to the bus, and then all of a sudden. The teacher comes to get me, and then we're trying to go back, and literally rattlesnakes. Like for some reason, the rattlesnakes were like, "Oh, the sun's out. We're about to come up here in the sunlight. We're gonna pour our bodies all over the ground, and we're just about to like make it impossible for you to get back onto that bus." And then my teacher was like, "Just go slow. Rattlesnakes won't strike you if you go slow." Not true, by the way, but I'm sure because I was a child, she was trying to make me not realize the danger I was in. But those rattlesnakes must have been like extremely baked, like in the sun, not the other kind of baked. And it was just like, because they were not moving, they were just like lying there. And it wasn't like I was like, oh, maybe it's not even the real snakes. Maybe it's like the skins are just left out because they shed. And then I was like, no, they're moving. This definitely is not like we stumbled into like the first chamber in the Chamber of Secrets situation where it's just the skin. Everybody, we can look at the skin fine, but once we see the snake itself, we're going to be frozen forever. So no, it wasn't that kind of thing. And I'm just like, okay. So note to self, Cameron, you don't like rattlesnakes. You live in the desert in Washington. This is no longer, there's no such thing as snakes in Washington because you've never seen them, and you say those lies to yourself so you can go outside in the middle of a desert, and then you're like, nope. If you're not making enough noise and you're just chilling and you're not making where you are known to the snake, they're gonna surround you and be like, hey, it's okay to come sunbathe now. And I was just like, okay, well, I feel like my parents should have been told about that because I was scared for my life, but that whole thing was I learned the danger of like entering a space you're not comfortable with and not realizing how to get out of that. Because the only reason I got out of that specific situation was because the teacher knew how to like backtrack without making the snakes rile up and to do something. And so she was the one that was coaching me to like step this way, follow these steps, because she was like, she had boots on, and they were like knee-high boots. So like if they were to do something, it would have been harder for her. So she was like showing me where to step. Almost, yeah, it was a crazy day in my childhood, and I don't remember telling my parents this, but I really hope I did because it's just so crazy. Because like literally, I think this is in third grade, because literally not long after this happened is when I was like, hey, I didn't realize the desert was as hot as it was. Because my teacher was like, hey guys, tomorrow, just don't eat breakfast. Again, I'm sharing these cool stories. I hope you guys are excited, because I'm like, why is it always so hot? Again, third grade. And then the teacher was like, oh yeah, well, we'll teach you why it's so hot and why you should always have water and stuff on you here in the desert. Because she took like next day, she brings a cast iron skillet, and I can't remember what she used it on, because she cooked pancakes on the ground. I think she did use like some kind of cleaning thing for the ground, but she's like, we're making pancakes, we're making eggs, and I'm like, I don't want to like advocate people from eating on the ground, but if you can make pancakes on the ground, why doesn't everybody do that? It's because it's normally filthy. But like that's the example of seeing something and like my brain catching up, like because I was like, oh, so like on certain times and certain examples, you might be able to get away with this, but in general, you should not do this. Thank you, Elf, for teaching me. Oh, you shouldn't just eat all the gum on a wall because it's not free. And I'm sorry if anybody out there doesn't know that ABC gum is not free. Don't eat that. This is a public notice. Don't eat that stuff. Just Elf the movie has said that first, and I'm just reiterating that fact. But again, like things that we learn in life that are lessons is crazy. And something that I had an epiphany in this past month was I have this like inherent belief that I have to like continue being the person that I was like the last 28 and almost 29 years of my life. And then I'm like, well, no, you don't have to open the book that you close at night. You don't have to open the same book. You can take that book off the shelf and like throw it somewhere else and then just start a new journal and begin anew. And for some reason, I knew the idea of what that meant, but I had never been like, no, we don't have to make the same choices. Because sometimes I feel like the way that guilt works, and you see what happened just there? That what I was about to do was like, as this happens to me a lot, where shame disguises itself. Sorry, where shame disguises itself as guilt. That's not true, because there's a way that like our shame likes to like implant itself in our like inside ourselves, so that we think that this is the normal way of thinking, or we think, oh, these are habits, we can never break them. And then there's the whole idea of like, oh, it takes 20 times or whatever to break a habit. So then that becomes another fact that I use to make myself stay put. Because I'm like, well, do I really have 20 times in me to like actually change this? Because then it just because like eventually I realized that I don't view myself as lazy, but like I've noticed that energy is becoming more and more prevalent for me. And I'm like, do I even have the energy for this? And it's like, why am I so exhausted? It's like my brain, and I know why. It's because my brain trained itself to be in constant gymnastics. I don't know how to, I don't know if that was said correctly, but it's like I'm doing constant gymnastics. It's like, oh, I'm chilling watching something. You know what? While we're trying to like relax, I'm going to think about 1,000 things I should do, even though I said, oh, this is the time to relax, and we gave ourselves this amount of time. And I'm like, well, you learned in GPT that if you decide to give yourself a certain amount of time, you have to honor that. And if you start thinking about other stuff, be like, hey guys, go away. We said 45 minutes is just me time. So after 45 minutes, you can come back. But before then, get out. Okay? Thank you. The door to the room is closed. That's kind of the way I talk to myself sometimes. It's just like, oh, we wanted to relax, but my brain was like, well, you didn't do this thing today, and you didn't do this, and you said you were going to do this also, but then you didn't do that also. And then I'm like, okay, but I just did work a whole bunch of hours. So let me have a brief reprieve, if you may, before you just start hounding me, okay? And then I think there's a time in your life when you realize that you are the bully that you feared when you were a child. And maybe that's just me, but and again, I've said this before on this channel where my brain latches on to the voice of people that have bullied me, and it latches on to what they said. So if I have any thought that could be remotely similar to what that person said, I'll start hearing it in that person's voice. And I wish I was good at and because of that, I almost wish that I was better at impressions, because I'm like, you can hear all this stuff exactly how, like, because it literally is like, it's like sound memory. And I'm like, you can hear that all so precisely that sometimes it tricks you to believe that this is actually being said. But these people haven't talked to you in years, and you're still giving them so much weight. And then I'm like, well, these people don't even remember they said this, and they don't even care about you anymore. So what are you doing, brain? And the brain's like, hey, listen, guy, I felt like you weren't doing what I wanted, which was being miserable. and you weren't hearing your self voice tell you to be miserable. So I thought, hey, let's dive into the memory pot and just like throw some things out there. Let's like have some fun. And I'm like, a brain, why? Why do you have to be that way, my guy? We're supposed to be on the same team, but it feels like you're kind of against me, and I don't know what I did to deserve that. So I okay, I'm gonna be honest with you guys. Today I'm going back to comedy classes, and for some reason, these feel like bits that I'm doing, but it's not. This is how I naturally talk to myself, and I've been hindering it because I'm like, why don't I want people to hear how I actually speak to myself? But I'm like, this sounds like a bit that I'm doing, and I'm not trying to at all. It's just really how my brain works and operates. It's like, oh, you think you're done with me, guy? I don't think so. Sometimes, what did I do to you, man? All I've done is try to keep you alive, try to keep a roof over your head, and you're here like, I'm sorry. Thanks for working 8.5 hours so we can still be miserable once you're home. Get the gosh. I'm like, gosh, sometimes that's why I love mindfulness, because mindfulness is kind of like, okay, we got to get rid of those voices. We got to get into like the non-thinking territory of your life. So that way you can just be in the moment, and anything that's not the moment just like goes away, goes behind the curtain. And it's like, hey, we didn't ask you to be here. You're not part of the club. Go. I said go. You're not invited. You don't even go here. Sorry. We passed past October 3rd, but Mean Girls is on my brain. It's just one of those things. And then I've had a lot of realizations. It's like, I don't have to continue the book. I don't. I can pick that book up, put it in the incinerator, and never open it again. And if I do something like that in the future, it's a different book. Like, you can have echoes of the first part of a series in later books, but like the whole point is a character is constantly progressing. It doesn't backtrack. It doesn't back down. It works on like themselves, and then the character arc is them becoming better versions of themselves. Maybe not perfect, but just like better than they were before. And that's really all I've ever wanted for myself, is like, okay, well, we're not gonna be perfect today. We just want to be better than the day we were yesterday. And if I can do that one thing, I know that I'm doing okay. And to be honest, September was a very bad month for me. I don't know what it was, but it felt like depression met lack of interest, met lack of like wanting to do anything. I don't know. I've been depressed, but like I'm just like, I want to do all these things, but like I don't want to do anything. And that's that's kind of the thing I'm battling with right now, is like I have a desire to do so much, but I just don't want to do anything. Like, and there's no parent to be like, well, get it done. And my friend had a great idea because I was telling her the stuff. It's like, I want to change. And she's like, well, you're an actor. Maybe, because it's hard for you to do it because you only have yourself, your own thoughts to do it. Maybe, like, create something that's kind of like a force that, like, is your, like, accountability person. For me, I thought that was a good idea, because most of the times people out there, if you go to therapy, were like, well, you get an accountability buddy if you're trying to A, lose weight, to be better, like mentally, or like, you know, somebody you go to like until you get to your next therapy appointment. Because I do find the sharing of like the struggle of humanity to be it's something that I love with friendship. I've always loved it. I love hearing not only about the good times in my friend's life, but also when they're struggling, because we all experience different things. We all have different like pathways through life, and sometimes that exposes us to things that we wouldn't know otherwise. All those examples I said earlier in the episode with my aunt and my sister could have been avoided if I had been exposed to any of that stuff before the day I entered that bathroom, or the day I drove on that grass, or other stuff has happened, but I'm not going to get into those stories. But like, you know what I'm saying? It's like, oh, I wasn't exposed to that before. And I value that in friends. I'm like, oh, they have. Like, I can learn from them. But like, I feel, but when I get into this, sometimes I feel like I now need to tell people, hey, I know that I come to you for advice, but you are not obligated to be perfect because I seek advice from you. The whole point is I see you as a friend, and I see you who you are, and I know that it's not all perfect. I'm going to you because I trust you. But just because you're somebody giving advice to somebody doesn't mean that your life has to be 100% perfect. Also, another thing that's great to learn in school is like, oh, you get feedback. You take some of that feedback because it's good feedback and it actually aligns to what you view for your story or, your movie or your life. You take some of that stuff that actually feel like it aligns with your own vision of who you want to be or what you want your craft to be. But anybody who starts saying things that are outside of what your vision for your life and your story is, like sometimes things have been pointed out to me that I'm like, oh, I would have thought about that. Thank you. And you said it in a really rude way. And I was like, that guy's a jerk. But what you said is valid. And I would have thought about that without that jerk saying nothing. I'm saying this in a very vague way because I just don't want to have this person reach out to me and like have to rehash it out. But it's just like, oh, that jerk said that thing. Okay, well, let's get rid of like whatever he said and just get to the root of what I thought was true. An example I've said before is like the Flyaway Girl. I wish I knew the specific thing, so if anybody goes to my YouTube channel, the Grand Central, and watches that video of that movie, I could tell you what changed. But like an example of like a negative, it wasn't negative, but something that's pointed out to me is like one of the actresses didn't understand why she was reacting so hugely to a moment, and it's because she read the script, but she didn't get that this was the moment where everything is decided. And so when on the day, she was really asking me, she's like, this feels overly dramatic and doesn't match the argument that I just had with my sister. And I'm like, you're correct. And I was like, let's get what my overreaction first. Because I think that's important with any director or any kind of filmmaker is like, if somebody points out something out to you and you're like, oh, that's a good point. Okay, well, I hear your point. I get what you're trying to fix, but I want to make sure I get what I want because then I know I'm covered. I got what my vision of the story was covered. Now that I'm on set and we have the equipment and like the set and we have the like everything is rolling, now and be like, okay, there's this flaw maybe that's being pointed out. I think it works. But maybe when I get into the editing room and post-production, it won't. So I'm going to film another version of what just happened, how she thinks the reaction should go and at what level. So that way, when you get into the editing room and you're playing around with things, you're like, okay, this is what I thought. And then this is what she thought and how it would be like more of a real reaction. Because the other way, without like being put in the correct like place in the film, would feel like too much. And that is actually one of the things that I have a pet peeve about with filmmakers sometimes is like, there's a levels. Like if anybody who's done stage acting knows like, oh, there's 1 to 10. 10, if you go to 10, you got to save that. That has to be at one point in a film or a play, because if you go to 10 all the time, that 10 is gonna feel like a 1, and everybody's gonna leave that stage feeling exhausted, like they don't know how to reach tomorrow because you've went so far that you no longer have the energy to keep going. And a similar thing can be said about songs, because a lot of times artists will choose those moments to add emphasis to the story being told with the lyrics. And so that's when we have swells, and then like it like gets to a point, and then like a note will be sung, and then the beat will drop, because that's like the big like level 10 moment. And that's kind of the same thing that we have to, like we think about with people is like, oh, confrontation. Sometimes I'm like, well, is this a level 10? If it's not a level 10, do I need to say something? No. And now for me, I'm like, well, I can let level 1s and levels 2 go, unless level 1s and levels 2 aren't like random occurrences. They're constantly happening. Because that's when the level 1s, level 2s become a problem, is when you're like surrounded by them and you're like, hey, guys, I get that it's a small thing, but it's like I can't open a cupboard. I can't I can't go to my room. I can't do anything without seeing those like issues, because you're just shoving it in my face. So we gotta fix that, okay? And if we fix that, then we're gonna be all solid and good. Like for me, the bigger thing that I've noticed with me and people is like communication. I need communication to be like on solid ground with people. If you communicate with me, I will be your best friend. Like, as long as we're communicating and you're being honest, you tell me how you really feel, I will always be like there for you. I will always like have your back. I will always make sure that if somebody's miserable, I get them back on being happy, and then we join the party together. Like, that's just how I operate. Is like the communication helps me know where I stand, because I struggle with reading facial cues and social situations because I have not been around those things a lot. And so I've noticed that that's a fear of mine that I'm working on. Is I'm like, you kind of Cameron. You've watched a lot of shows, and you watched a lot of movies, you read a lot of books, and you've watched a lot of like stuff, like plays and stuff. So you have an idea of how the world works and like how things should happen. But you haven't actually got first. You have some first world experience, but most of the time it's like through a medium. And there are some things that I just don't need experience in my life, and I'm okay with that. But there are other things where I think that the nuances and how to cover that and how to hold my own can only be actually figured out in the moment when you're experiencing it yourself. You can't really know what to do if it's all theoretical. You need like field experience. And that's something that I'm trying to push myself to do, is like, hey, we have ideas of how things work. We have a mission. We know what we want to do, but we can't do those things if it's all theoretical. I'm sorry, Sheldon from Big Bang Theory. The only reason like your stuff is so important is because it was proved correct in the actual practice of it. And I don't know why that came up in my mind, but it's just like, oh, theory is great, and then the only reason that theory is good is because it can be proven and at least followed and solved. I don't know why I brought Sheldon in, because my brain is not big enough to handle what Sheldon solved. I don't know why I wanted to enter that chat into this conversation. Let's exit that, because I don't even know enough about what he spiels about over there. I think it's physics, but it's just like, I don't know enough about physics to bring that into an actual example of what I'm talking about. It's kind of like, oh, I have been on set before. I've worked with people. I love the creative brain. I know mostly how it functions, and I know what you need to do to make sure everybody feels covered and safe, and actually making sure that they feel taken care of. Because I've had films that failed, and I had projects that I really loved, and the things that I learned about those things is like, oh, okay, well, the thing that matters most is we want to make sure everybody is taken care of on set, because that translates to how like the performance goes. And then, like, 'cause once people are exhausted with each other, I think that it makes the work suffer. So making sure that we're all on the same page is how you make something beautiful together. And I think that translates to real life, because a lot of times we feel like there's so many miscommunications going on because nobody's communicating. Whereas if we just communicated what we needed, and then we gave each other space to get what we needed, like the way that we need it, without judgment, I think that the world would just be like a better place, because then we're allowing each other to be ourselves and navigate like the best way possible. But for some reason, it feels like we're like in this strategy of like there's being only one way, when sometimes I get into that strategy, because like the thing I realized is I was like, oh, well, I have to keep writing the story because that's my story, Cameron. And I'm like, well, no, you don't have to write the story that you thought was being written for you since you were little, because obviously the people who wrote that beginning chapter of your story didn't really have a whole bunch of respect and care for you. They mostly were just like, oh, that guy is still here. No bitterness at all detected right now, sir. So you're just like, you know what? Let's just throw that book out the window, and let's start anew and figure out how we can be the best version of this self of Cameron. Not the past one, just like every day is like a new opportunity to be better. Because I've realized that it's very easy when you no longer have people pushing you to just fall into a pattern and stay there for a very long time. And when you get into a pattern that feels safe, like you're taken care of, it's even more tempting to never leave that pattern, because if you leave that pattern, then scary things can start happening again. Like, I want to move to California. That has not changed, but thoughts are starting to enter where it's like, oh, well, you kind of have your own apartment. You kind of have your own job. You know how long it took to feel like you were like in a solid place in Minnesota? You really want to start over in California or New York or the other place that gets filmed a lot, Boston or Atlanta, you want to start over there? Are you sure? Because you could just stay here where like you weren't planning on being, but you've been here for so long. And I'm like, I've had thoughts of staying, and if I do stay, there's no negative to that, but it's like it's not real choice. It's me giving into like these thoughts, being like, do we really have to do it again? Do we really want to put ourselves through that? And it's fear just diving in, being like, oh, you think you're going somewhere. I don't think so. You are not done with fear. And as far as I'm concerned, Cameron, the only person you listen to is fear. And that's kind of when you, like, that's literally how, like, as I've done DBT, the more I have been able to just hear those thoughts and be like, that's not me. You think you know me, but you're not me, but you're bored and you want to like stop me in my tracks. And sometimes I am weak and I let you win. And I feel guilty about that, but I am not going to do that anymore. Gosh, I need to, this is going to sound weird. I need to speak out loud more to myself because I just said something that was shame again and I called it guilt. Because obviously if your brain's trying to make you feel a certain way, that's not justified. It's just like, especially in my example, it wasn't justified. It was just my brain being like, oh, well, we need to be miserable, so we got to be miserable. Not justified just because my brain wants to feel that emotion. It's just, so it is a shame thing, but like I don't speak aloud to myself normally. And so maybe I should, because now I'm catching those like thoughts that are untrue as I'm saying them aloud. And that's something that happens with DBT is like you get more and more of a degree of separation. So then you can actually like hear those thoughts and catch them and not let them like ring true in your brain. And so it's easier to get back on like the path that you want for today or next week, or because it's easy. It's okay to have a certain like level in your life and be like, I'm there. This is what I want to enjoy. And I'm happy here. That is great and beautiful. And just don't let anybody like just take that from you. Because if you know where you want to be in life and you're there, then that's okay. And don't let anybody else tell you differently, because that's what makes you happy. I'm going to end this episode just by saying that like these reflection videos really help me just piece together like different things that I've heard in like the past month that I've been struggling with, or like ideas, because sometimes I hear something and it feels like it's going to really help me, and then I don't flush it out as much as it needs to get flushed out for me just to understand what it was really trying to teach me. Because I've thought about like throwing out a book before and starting anew, but like that felt like so much work when really it doesn't take any work to just throw out the old version. That's just boop, thrown out the door. You don't have to worry about that. It, like me choosing that one step already begins the writing of another story. And that's all that it takes. Is I feel like the step before action feels like the hardest step to take. And it can feel that way, but I believe and I hope it rings true to you that it's not. So that we can actually benefit and move forward in our lives and get what we want and like desire for ourselves. And so with that, I'm going to end the episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope that when you go throughout the week that you can take a moment just to breathe in, then breathe out. And remember just to show up for yourself, because you matter.